Hello and welcome once again to The Blueprints. This is Canada's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We ask that you like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. Of course, if you can't watch or listen to this program in its entirety right this very second, download it and listen to it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. You name it, it is out there. We have Greg McLean to join us today, the Member of Parliament for Calgary Centre, to talk about a whole range of issues, but most importantly, David Johnston, the Governor General, former Governor General, testifying before committee right this very second to answer questions about what he knew or did not know in his report to the Prime Minister. And of course, a few new developments since we last talked on this show. We had a vote in the House of Commons asking for David Johnston to step aside. He refused to do so because he says he answers to the government and not Parliament, which is a very important distinction to make, where Parliament, in our opinion, should always be supreme.
Exactly right. And Parliament is supposed to be your group that holds the government and council, cabinet if you will, the government, to account for everything they're doing. Now, David Johnston, the thing about this that I think a lot of people are seizing onto is they think he reports to Parliament. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think what they're looking at is saying, this really isn't that democratic a process at the end of the day if the only person he responds to is the Prime Minister, who's the head of cabinet, the head of the government, and yet that's who's appointing him and who is really apparently might be in a bit of a conflict here. So if the only person you report to is the person who might be in conflict, is it really a democratic, open examination of the issues that we need to look at here?
Well, I would say no, especially when they are known Trudeau Foundation members. David Johnston, he was a former Governor General, served honorably, but yet I'm not sure why he allowed himself to be put into the situation where his integrity is questioned based on his history with the Trudeaus, based on the fact David Johnston watched Justin Trudeau grow up and spent time at their cottage and they were ski buddies, all that kind of stuff. And tons of footage that shows interview after interview with both Justin Trudeau and David Johnston saying what great friends they all are. He did this to himself, unfortunately, but I also blame the Prime Minister primarily because he made that decision to appoint David Johnston the special rapporteur. And
there's a point in time when my staff and I were putting together a letter to David Johnston himself when he was being appointed by the Prime Minister saying, what are you doing? This is a conflict of interest. Whether you look at it as a conflict of interest from your perspective or not, it is a conflict of interest. A perception of a conflict of interest is a conflict of interest by definition.
Absolutely.
So if anybody had advised him, anybody from the private sector, or anybody that wasn't just part of the government circle that he seems to be reporting to right now, he should have picked up the phone, called a friend, and actually got some advice on what is a conflict of interest. Am I potentially in a conflict of interest here? The problem for David Johnston is it really has changed a lot of perceptions about him personally on this, and that's a shame because he was a good Governor General. But that book he wrote now about trust, I think a lot of people are looking at it going, you're asking us to trust, and yet the institutions that seem to govern us as a country don't seem to exude trust anymore.
Funny you should say that, because just before the show started, I was watching a bit of the committee goings on, and Michael Cooper, Member of Parliament, St. Albert, Edmonton, from your home province of Alberta, was questioning the former Governor General, the rapporteur, David Johnston, about how the final report to the Prime Minister was made when the main focus of this whole thing, aside from Michael Chong and the threats being made, but also the interference in the last election, 2021, where the meeting with Johnston and former leader Erin O'Toole took place, but it became evident during that meeting that the report was in translation, so the printing presses were already being fired up. So what's the point in asking the former leader what his thoughts on the whole thing? What did he experience in interference in our elections? But also, that should be in that report. Like, I don't understand David Johnston's line of thinking here.
Yeah, there seemed to be a lack of, end result versus process here. Usually you go through the process to get the result. In this case, you're right, they were already printing the report before they met with our previous leader, Erin O'Toole, which seems a little backwards. And I think that is another red flag where people are saying, what exactly happened here? What was the process he had to go through to determine his outcome? And did he actually go through a proper process to get that done? Good question.
Well, now we have, we talked about it last week with Larry Brock, that David Johnston asked for advice from a lawyer, well known, a former Supreme Court justice, but also a member of the Trudeau Foundation. Turns out David Johnston, who also had to hire crisis communications and a firm known to handle those that are, falling very fast and needs help. But this one today from the Globe and Mail, that David Johnston's lead counsel on foreign interference probe attended a Justin Trudeau Foundation in 2021. Her name, of course, is Sheila Block, and it shows that she's attended many fundraisers, contributed about $7,500 to the Liberal Party between 2006 and 2022, also a member of the Trudeau Foundation. Is it the fact that nobody outside the Liberal Party is smart enough to understand what's going on, that they must keep this in tight circles because they just know what's best?
Yeah, well, look, in order for Canadians to have faith in this process that has been gone through here, but it seems to have been rushed through and, corners cut, if you will, in order for Canadians to have this trust going forward, there's going to have to be an open process that has some really solid people that aren't connected with the decision, involved in making the decision. And that's what has to happen here. Get beyond the Ottawa bubble and all the people that are contributing to the noise around Ottawa, and get somebody from outside this realm, if you will, to actually take a look at this and determine what we need to do. And continue to engage all your friends and supporters is not leading Canadians toward a stronger impression of trust in this government. And that's where any government has to get towards. Where are we going as a country? And does the Canadian people trust the government anymore? We're losing that. We need to get that back. This is an important institution. The more we fail at this, and we fail as an institution, and the governing council right now is doing that to us, we've got to get this back. Canadians need to have faith in democracy, have faith in this institution, and what it can do to make their lives better.
Well, one thing they can do to make their lives better is not pass the Liberal budget that's up for debate. Actually, this whole week, we're supposed to be debating it today. It looks like closure, and that's a parliamentary term. They're going to cut off debates on the budget bill, which spends billions and billions. We're running the country on the credit card. You're a finance guy. This is where you shine. Your observation on this whole thing.
Well, this is the Budget Implementation Act, but the budget itself, of course, is more money throwing at a wall. And look at where that money's going. It's going towards a whole bunch of pet projects without accountability. There's so much this government is doing that has no accountability mechanisms in it whatsoever. Their new spending in a new fund they're going to have up, the Canada Fund, the Canada Growth Fund, I think this one is called, in addition to the Canada Infrastructure Bank and all the programs they're having, billions and billions of dollars. This is going to be run on the back of a napkin by the public sector pension board. It's like, okay, this is supposed to be a high-risk investment. High-risk investing and pension investing are the opposite as far as the financial manager goes. So what is really happening here? Number one, get a board together, get a mandate, understand what this new group is supposed to do once they get the cash. But this is just shovel the cash in, we'll decide what the metrics are later. So again, trying to work around that accountability mechanism that I think Canadians need to see. What is this group for? What is this money for? And how does it respond at the end of the day to the needs of the country? I'm going to suggest that this is just another slush fund. There's a lot of slush funds this government has set up, and it's throwing money out the door. The industrial policy they're going through is going to be decimating for the country at the end of the day. We've got a big bill to pay, and the next generation is going to pay a huge bill. Our responsibility is to make sure that we pass on a country that has some strength in it, both financially and, of course, infrastructure, institutions that will continue to govern us going forward. That is important, and we are losing that at this point in time. The amount of investment in this country from a private sector perspective is down about 10%. So we're down to 90% of what our contributed capital to the country was since this government came into power. It's a continual downgrade, if you will, of our infrastructure, of the value of the country at the end of the day. We're more in debt. We're more in debt at the government level. We're more in debt at the consumer level. We're more in debt at the corporate level. These debts are mounting at every level of government. We need to make sure we have a great healthcare system, a great social system, and a great economy here that we can build on going forward. People need to arrive in Canada with a great opportunity to build a great life, and that's what we have to build back, Jamie.
I couldn't agree more. And our leader, Pierre Poilievre, spoke a couple hours ago about that exact very topic. talking about how rising interest rates, when mortgages that were bought at inflated prices and borrowed when money was cheaper, I guess, than what it is now. Those with variable rates, or even those that locked in at 5 years, those mortgages come due very, very soon. And with the cost of living now out of control, groceries, fuel, you name it, is just out of control right now, through the roof. When those mortgage payments come due, you're talking, I believe, memory serves, he said about $15,000 for the average family, for the average mortgage increase, just on increased payments because of the higher interest rates. But you can't bring down rates because the inflation crisis still looms, because the government continues to spend. It's putting gasoline on the fire. It's just an endless circle.
You got it. But the issue is, of course, with mortgages as well, it's after-tax money you pay your mortgage with. So if you think, if you're making $100,000 a year, the average Canadian makes $66,000 a year. But just for round numbers, say $100,000 a year, you're going to leave about 39% of that in Alberta on the table. So you're down to $61,000 of your salary on a $100,000 salary. Rough numbers, if you will, because there are some layering in there. But so your mortgage payment comes out of that residual number, and you've still got to pay for food, which, as you know, is going up 11% over the last year. They've still got to pay for everything else that happens in life. And now suddenly this payment you thought was your payment to buy this house has gone up through the roof. So how does that work, right? One of the things about mortgages is that by far, the term for mortgages in Canada is the 5-year term, okay? So you take a look at how long it's been since mortgages started rising in Canada. Over the next 3.5 years still, that's going to continue to become evident to people that finance their homes, and maybe a bit more of a home than they can afford, but they finance it at below 1% or 1 to 2%. And now it's going up to plus 5% more. It's a significant big chunk to take out of their salaries at the end of the day. As a result, you're going to lead towards inflation, because they're all going to need more money. They're all going to ask for more money from their employers as they see everything in life costing more. They're going to say, okay, my expenses are going up. Shouldn't my salary go up in the same trajectory?
Right.
And that's going to cause even more inflation. So the number one precursor to inflation, of course, is wages. The second is energy. And energy has gone through the roof in Canada, largely because of the government's additional taxes on energy. It's got, of course, the carbon tax, and it's chosen to go the way in the carbon tax, which is questionable whether it is actually accomplishing anything, and I would say it's not. And now it's got this clean fuels standard, which is a hidden tax on energy, and our party's done a good job of that, about exposing how much that's going to be. 61 cents a litre as of July 1st is the federal tax on fuel. It is over the top. So you think about what that's going to do. It's not like the refiners are going to take any less margin. They're already existing on some thin margin. Everybody gets paid in this process here. So who's going to pay the money, of course, is the consumer at the end of the day. The funny thing is that people don't seem to realize is the rationale for these taxes is that people will make choices that lower their expenditures. So they'll make the choice not to buy as much gasoline, which means they have to make the choice to travel less. They have to make the choice to visit grandma less.
Hospitality industry starts to suffer.
They've actually got to make the choice to take their kids to soccer less, because a lot of these things are built into their lifestyle. They're going to have to start making choices they didn't know they had to make. And that's when the rubber hits the road as far as what is the effect of what we're doing here. The longer the government can hide the effects of what they're doing here, the better for them, because it gets muddled in with a whole bunch of other policies. But this is the factor that's going to, affect Canadians' lives the most.
You couldn't, absolutely. And when you start to cut back on the discretionary purchases, in many cases, that's the fun stuff, right? The vacations, or going out for dinner, or even taking your kid or your family member or whatever just to go see a movie, right? That's the stuff that scales down. And then when that starts to, the layers of the onion start peeling, and the economy really starts going without a plan, as you mentioned earlier, for growth, for economic growth from this government.
Yeah, and you talk about that. You talk about discretionary spending. I don't think many parents look at the sports programs or the leisure programs or the arts programs they have their kids in. They don't look at that as discretionary spending. So they try to cut back in other areas, because keeping your kids fit, growing, educated, these are things parents want to do. They want their kids to have a better life than they had. We all do. That is our dream, to make sure our kids get handed something better than we had growing up. And we were gifted with a legacy here in Canada, a great country. It's our job to make sure that continues. And that means that these programs need to continue for our kids. So people don't look at that as a discretionary spending. Yes, a movie might be discretionary spending. Soccer programs, hockey programs, dance programs, arts programs, we don't look at these discretionary. We want to make sure that our kids have all these opportunities.
100%. But when the budget starts to get tighter,
that's right. Choices have to be made.
And of course, municipalities that run the hockey rink, they're paying a carbon tax, right?
And you can't run your household the way the government runs its budget, which is like just get the Bank of Canada to print more money and we'll continue to run this. And the effect of inflation of that, of course, is self-evident now. And I think that our leader and our party was well ahead of that in the pandemic era, when we actually said you cannot continue to print money without causing inflation. And this is known in all economic circles. The effect of inflation was going to be felt. The only question was when. And this inflation now is upon us. And how do we nip it in the bud? Well, number one, get budgets back under control. The first budget you have to get under control is the federal government's budget. And again, an extra $60 billion in this budget being thrown into new discretionary spending, it's not solving the problem. So inflation is going to rise.
The government's never had so much cash, and yet they can't solve the problem.
Yeah, that's right.
So more money is the answer, clearly.
Yeah, well, if writing a check was always the answer, then every household would solve it that way.
But that's how the Liberals use their metrics of success. Not whether they solve the problem, just how much money they've actually put towards it.
That's right. And what did they accomplish at the end of the day? Okay, well, I wrote a check. That's not really accomplishing something.
Not really.
Where's the solution here that has to arise from that expenditure?
And it's a bit of a shame about the Bank of Canada, too. They really, unfortunately, through this whole pandemic and the Liberal government and their exercises, they really politicized the bank.
They did. You look at, the brain trust, if you will, at the Bank of Canada, because it's not just one governor, but this rush towards quantitative easing as the solution is really Keynesianism on steroids. We've got Keynesianism where you balance the economy with government spending, and now you've got that jacked up, if you will, with spending at the Bank of Canada itself. So it puts that extra, those extra assets on its balance sheet, because they are assets that they're holding on their balance sheet. Unfortunately, that has to unwind at some point in time. And in the unwinding, as we're seeing now, they're taking losses every time they have to try to unwind. And those losses are on the balance sheet of the Bank of Canada right now. Functionally, the Bank of Canada is bankrupt. So in this Budget Implementation Act, there is actually a resolution to make it so that the Bank of Canada has a mechanism to deal with the fact that it's losing money every day when it never has before. And this is the effect of quantitative easing. One of the problems we always have in Canada is we say, well, everybody else in the world is doing it. When the U.S. is doing something, or the European Union is doing something on this quantitative easing programs. Every other entity in the world is looking at this quantitative easing. Nobody has dealt with the full effects of quantitative easing to this point in time. Nobody has gone into it and come out of it and actually shown what happens. Well, we're seeing what happens now. This is real time. Bank of Canada is losing money on an annual basis, a monthly basis, a daily basis, if you will, because of the mispricing of the assets they put on their balance sheet while they were printing too much money. And now they've got to atone for that. And that, like if you're a regular bank, if you're a Silicon Valley bank, that's exactly how it went bankrupt. But you're the Bank of Canada, so you've got the government of Canada to backstop you at the end of the day with Bank of Canada money. So you can kind of see the circular rationale these high-level bureaucrats and the government itself are functioning under. You shake my hand, I'll shake yours. Everything will be fine at the end of the day. Well, it's not fine for the taxpayers of Canada because we're incurring huge losses. And these are huge losses that could have been avoided if we'd been more careful about what we spent money on at all periods.
Well, the parliamentary budget officer said half of the money that was spent during the pandemic had nothing to do with COVID. It was all couched in the language of COVID, but actually was just pet projects of the Liberals, which you said. So it was just an excuse to spend more money. And that's basically what happened. And now we're dealing with the after effects.
And we exposed that early in the pandemic, basically, because a lot of the interest groups that are Liberal-funded interest groups more or less said, we can't miss this opportunity to move this agenda forward. And this agenda, of course, is a bunch of different agendas at the end of the day. And government is supposed to be more than a collection of interest groups. It's supposed to be working for the Canadian people as a whole. And I think it lost that perspective. And it used the excuse to lose that perspective because it was like, we're fighting for a greater good here at the end of the day. Well, it's all a greater good, but at the end of the day, it's about what's best for Canadians. Our job, as you know, Jamie, is to deliver good government for Canadians and make sure they have trust in these institutions that we serve them through.
Well, I think that trust, as you mentioned, has been unfortunately diminished. I hate to say it, but through this whole process, I think Canadians are frustrated. And to also listen to the Liberals and the way they just belittle Canadians that tried to take their money and put it somewhere where they didn't think the government was going to debauch it, right? They went into gold, silver, and yes, cryptocurrency to try to get away from the damage the government was doing to their dollar, to their savings. And that is something that just gets my blood boiling almost instantly, the way the Liberals just look down on people for trying to protect their savings.
Yeah, cryptocurrency has a role to play in the assets of people because you never know what's going to happen in different jurisdictions around the world. The whole notion of cryptocurrency at the end of the day was if you're saving a bunch of money here in Canada and you can buy 100 loaves of bread with a certain amount of, let's call it a Bitcoin or whatever the case is, although it's not an accurate depiction, and you have to move to some other country, well, hopefully the place you move, that non-national currency, if you will buy you 100 loaves of bread wherever you are, wherever you land in the world. That's the nature of it, that the value is fungible, if you will. It moves across jurisdictions so that you're not being manipulated by what some government thinks their currency should be worth, therefore what your savings should be worth. That's the whole concept behind setting up cryptocurrencies, that there's not a national layer sort of saying we need to devalue your money in order to get back into balance here on our budgets. People need to save and actually know what to expect from their savings at the end of the day. A whole bunch of other things come from there, of course, but that's the nature of what we're trying to drive at here. Canadians need to get back to trust. And you and I are affected by that as well. And that's why the sooner you and I hold this government to account and actually defeat it and get Canadians' trust so that we can start building back trust in the institutions of this country. That's what we're here for. And that's what we need to continue to strive for every day we're here, Jamie.
Well, I hope the NDP listens to what you just said. Greg, I could ask you more questions because I love talking about this stuff because you are so knowledgeable. But we are way over time. Yeah. You have the floor to close it out.
Well, Jamie, thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be here and speak with you about all these issues. And you always bring such a wealth of information as well. And I find some of your questions actually challenging. And in case your viewers don't know, these are not scripted answers. These are right off the cuff all the time whenever I come in here. And it's always a pleasure. And I'm glad your listeners are so informed, and I think this is part of what we have to do is make sure Canadians know what's happening all the time here. I'm not sure we're getting into those channels enough, but this is one of those great media channels, and folks, thanks for paying attention, and if you have any questions, I know Jamie's here and I'm here, and whatever we can answer, it's a pleasure.
You heard him. Greg McLean, Member of Parliament for Calgary Centre. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. There are ways to slow down the Liberal agenda. This is one of them. Get that message out. Get this message to ears. And yes, this show to eyeballs that might be open to hearing a different message they aren't hearing in the mainstream media. Of course, you can tell them, you can download it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. We have new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That is the blueprint.